Okay, hi everyone, this is Randy Swati. Thanks for the intros, Megan, and thanks everyone. As Megan said, I'm reporting from Western Wisconsin, and my internet just totally crashed like right before we started this, so I apologize if we have technical difficulties. So I want to introduce the Nature Conservancy's LANDFIRE team. We are a small part of a broader LANDFIRE program. We have Jim Smith, Corey Blankenship, myself, Sarah Hagan, Kim Hall, and sorry, my Zoom thing, and Megan Detmeyer, who you've already met. We range from Bend, Oregon, down to Jacksonville, Florida. As I mentioned, we're a small part of a broader LANDFIRE program that I'll describe in a moment. We are out here to assist you use LANDFIRE products. That's our main goal. So next slide, please. Okay, you are participating in week 3 of our State and Transition Simulation Modeling mini-series. If you haven't seen it already, Megan will send you links to presentations given by Corey Blankenship during week number 1 and Leonardo Frid during week number 2. And we hope you enjoy or have enjoyed so far our presentations and that you've learned a lot about station modeling. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to go through, give you an orientation of the agenda first before we jump right in. First, we're going to talk about LANDFIRE very briefly, and we'll encourage you to contact us to learn more about LANDFIRE or visit landfire.gov. Next. As I mentioned, we had a couple of presenters earlier that talked about state and transition simulation modeling, Corey and Leonardo. There's pictures of their YouTube videos that you can check out. Next slide. And this is sort of the main topic of our presentation today. We want to explore why you would use state and transition simulation modeling for education and conceptualizing ecosystem change. It may sound crazy, and we hope to convince you otherwise, or at least to convince you that it's crazy but worth trying. Next. We're going to go over some of our experiences using state and transition models in the classroom and with professionals. Next. We're going to give you some ideas of how to get started with using state and transition modeling in the classroom and elsewhere. And then finally, on our agenda, next slide, we're going to offer up some free help from the LANDFIRE team. Next. It's so funny with my lag, I'm not sure what you're seeing, so I hope that I'm synced up to some degree. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties.
We're on slide 12.
So we want to give you a brief intro to LANDFIRE, Tax Dollars at Work. It's a large federal program supported by the Department of Interior and the United States Department of Agriculture's Forest Service. The goal of the LANDFIRE program is to deliver data sets that help managers understand vegetation and fire characteristics across all lands in the United States, including the insular areas such as the Virgin Islands. Importantly, I want to know again that the Nature Conservancy's LANDFIRE team is a small part of this broader project. And I also want to emphasize that the LANDFIRE program, while it sounds like it's just data and models, is comprised of amazing people that are behind the scenes doing all the mapping for us. On this slide, you see one of my favorite data sets produced by the LANDFIRE mappers called biophysical settings. I chose to showcase this data set because it's linked up with the products we'll talk about later in the presentation. So this map depicts the dominant vegetation systems that would have been on the ground prior to European colonization. So in addition to the biophysical settings having the spatial data you see here, they're accompanied by text descriptions that describe each of the 900 ecosystems mapped here. And we also have state and transition models that go with each biophysical setting. So take this map in. I think it's visually beautiful, and the product's super powerful when combined with the descriptions and the models. Next slide, please. Okay, so take in this beautiful picture of sagebrush. As we know, the sagebrush ecosystem is dynamic. It's responsive to disturbances, alterations and disturbances to weather, climate, all sorts of factors. And we feel like just talking about the sagebrush ecosystem is one thing, but when interacting with students or professionals, being able to provide a framework for understanding how dynamic it is and how responsive it is adds a lot of value and helps people understand and or come to agreement how the ecosystems work. So we have state and transition simulation models like depicted here on this slide, developed by my colleague Corey Blankenship. So each of the gray boxes would be a stage in the development of this sagebrush ecosystem. And you see we gave it names such as grassland or sage shrubland. Each one of these stages has a period at which it lasts. So after 18 years, the grassland will succeed to sage savanna and so on in the absence of a disturbance. The disturbances are showcased with the yellow and red lines, the yellow lines depicting drought and the red lines, maroon lines depicting fire. And you'll notice that there are some numbers along with those lines. Those are the annual probabilities of those disturbances occurring. So most of us think in terms of return intervals, such as you might have a surface fire in a forested ecosystem every 10 years. We divide that 10 into 1 to give us an annual probability. So this isn't a math lesson, but I wanted you to kind of understand how we think of these systems. The LANDFIRE models go into SynchroSim. That's the software we used to get at making the models quantitative. So you see boxes here. This is an Aspen model that we developed for a classroom exercise that I'll talk about later. You see all those states, you see all the transitions, and if you were to double click into one of those states, you could enter in all the disturbance parameters. So again, we encourage you to go to synchrosim.com to learn more about this free and powerful software that we're here to support you with. Next slide. So models are typically used, I think of them in terms of the results, right? We want to know something. We want to know how increased fire regimes might impact a ponderosa pine forest. And so we put all of our inputs into the modeling software, and we run the model, then we analyze the results. I want to separate that results-minded focus to thinking of models in the education and conceptualization realms, right? So that's the kind of the focus of our talk today. Next slide, please. So another picture for you to take in. I love showing this picture to students to talk about how stakeholders drive everything in our work. It's rare that we work in a place that doesn't involve many stakeholders. Excuse me. In this picture, we have fire managers, we have indigenous peoples, we have agency managers, we have environmentalists, and we have ranchers who all have different views of what this landscape should look like. For example, the ranchers in this example love cheatgrass, an invasive exotic species that totally alters the ecosystem dynamics here. They love it because it's great forage for their cattle in the spring. Cheatgrass is a nightmare for the fire managers because it totally alters the fire regimes in these ecosystems. So here and in many places across the country, we use a collaborative learning approach through modeling to help at least bring together understanding of how these ecosystems work. So as we all know, it usually doesn't work very well to show up with an answer to a problem. We also know that when working with many people, showing up with just some questions that are open-ended often doesn't work as well either. We need a framework to capture everyone's thoughts, opinions, and to sort of scatter our work. And so these state and transition models work really well for that. Spoiler alert, I was not successful in this landscape. These partners at the time could pick up litter together, but they couldn't model together yet. That said, we have had many successes from the Cherokee National Forest to landscapes in Nevada where using a modeling approach has brought people together and has resulted in better land management and collaboration. Next slide, please. So in addition to those experiences with stakeholders, I ran across this paper that I encourage you to check out by folks across the country, mostly in Michigan actually, who explored the idea of using models to build ecoliteracy in the classroom. So next slide, please. They kind of frame the idea in a couple ways. First, they talk about building scientific habits of mind. This is the idea of helping students to think more like scientists. That is, testing hypotheses, gauging the credibility of evidence, and working through the scientific method the way a scientist would. Also, they bring up the challenge of ecology and the fun of ecology, which is all the connections. That's why I love what we do. I love to think about the stories of our ecosystems and how everything interacts to form all sorts of complex webs in our ecosystems. This can be tough to teach to students, and the authors of the paper propose that models can help us build this mindset of ecological connectivity. That is, not to just think about the plants or the animals, but think of them as a system. Next slide, please. So to summarize kind of what I've said so far, models provide scaffolding for understanding ecosystems. They provide a safe place for trying on different scenarios, both natural and anthropogenic. We don't have to go out and light a match or bulldoze or run a chainsaw to try things out. As you know, all models are wrong, some are useful, is the famous saying, but the models provide a safe place to test hypotheses. Also, we have found it's a great method for teaching concepts such as succession, disturbance, and management implications. Next slide, please. So how we use state and transition simulation models in education and with professionals. A few stories, and then I'll turn it over to Priscilla to dig into her case study. Next slide, please. One of my favorite professional experiences was getting to go to Guatemala and working in this Pinus oocarpa ecosystem. The situation there was not unusual. It was a situation where many people, many professionals had knowledge of this ecosystem in their heads, but they had not put it down on paper, excuse me, or had not documented it anywhere. So the thought was we could just write things down, we could interview people and put it in a Word document, but instead we decided to build a model. Next slide, please. How it worked was that we first drew everyone's knowledge on a whiteboard, and they made the terrible decision of having me do the writing. I guess they were stuck with that because I didn't know about the ecosystem. So we're stuck with my handwriting and my lack of drawing skills. But it worked. It was a very engaging conversation where we came up with a Word document. We were typing out notes, and we also drew this depiction of the Pinus oocarpa ecosystem. I cleaned up this conceptual model in PowerPoint, sent it back to the experts for review, and after cleaning that up and getting the okay, I transferred this information into SynchroSim, the modeling software that I mentioned earlier. Then we were set to build quantitative models, and we could run the models, and we could get the expected percentage of each of those states on the landscape. So you see some hypotheses in the squares, like 5%, 30%, 10%, and we could test those hypotheses. If we run the disturbance regimes, do we get those numbers? So it was a great way to capture information. That's one of my favorite stories of using the models with professionals. Next slide, please. Another thing that I've had a lot of fun doing, and it's not just about me having fun, I think it's also been very successful, was running some scenario testing in a high school classroom. The process is called landscape conservation forecasting, pioneered by our colleagues in Nevada, folks such as Greg Lowe, Susan Abel, and Louis Provencher. And the basic exercise is this. You pretend that you're the managers of a highly degraded aspen ecosystem. You can use fire, fencing, and cowboys as restoration tools. And the question is, which combination of those tools gets you the best results for the least cost? So what we do is we give the students a pre-populated model with all the states and transitions. We give them an Excel spreadsheet where they document how many acres of the different treatments they would use. Those cells are connected to costs, right? Each one of these treatments has a different cost. Then we allow them to type in the results of the model runs. So they would go into the model and they would say, okay, I want to try 100 acres of fire, 50 acres of fencing, and 300 acres of cowboying. They run the model, then they get the results and bring that into the Excel spreadsheet. The Excel spreadsheet calculates the difference between the desired conditions and the model outputs, brings in the cost factor, and then calculates a return on investment. So it's really great to have groups of students basically compete to see who can come up with the best combination of treatments to get the highest return on investment. And as they're poking through the model, they start having these great conversations like, oh, wait, if we do cowboying, if we do too much of that, we get an overrepresentation of this state, which means that in the dynamics, we get too little of this other state. Why is that happening? Wait, do we need to have more fire? The conversations are priceless, and it's stuff that I personally couldn't teach without the models. Talented teachers, I'm sure, could, but those conversations are what this is all about to me. Getting those students to question and explore dynamics. So I wanted to share another great paper called "Predicting the Distribution of Sasquatch in Western North America. Anything Goes with Ecological Niche Modeling." For a good laugh and for a thought-provoking, dig up this paper. We can send it to you as well. And it sort of inspired the case study and the work that Priscilla did at Grand Valley State University. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend, colleague, and crazy cousin, Priscilla Nyamai, to describe her work at Grand Valley State University.
Oh, thank you, Randy.
Priscilla, do you want me to stop sharing and you can do your own?
Yeah, I think it will let me in less. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As Randy mentioned, I am here to just share my experiences of what it's been like to integrate this in a course at the university where I am faculty at Grand Valley State. And none of what I say here is the best way to go. I am by no means an expert. I am just sharing how it's been for me to try and do this in the classroom. So I teach a course called Terrestrial Ecosystem Ecology, Bioforce 60, with a graduate component. And as you can imagine, in this course, we cover everything ecosystem, right? From the components of that ecosystem to the functions it provides, to the interactions between the elements in the ecosystem and the biotic part of it. And most importantly, to the disturbance ecology part of it, right? The processes that drive the components, that drive the interactions between the components, that drive the resource pulses, right? And so in my view, even though I teach a bioecology course as well, back in 2017, when I met with Randy, this was a perfect course to try and test this out, see if I can get the students to be excited about it, just as I did after talking to Randy for a few days. And so, you know, one of the important things that we do as educators is figuring out, why are you doing what you're doing? What are some of those objectives that you'd like for the students to achieve? And so for this particular course, I think it fitted well with what Randy was saying, that, you know, part of what STSMs provide, state transition modeling provides, is this opportunity to engage students in the learning process. I think this modeling process really helped, or has helped, my students to engage in their learning process rather than sitting there and just listening to the, you know, the theoretical stuff, because we cover a lot of that. I also think it helped me and the students to appreciate modeling more. I was not a modeler. And so I don't know about you, but the first time that many or some people hear about modeling, they're like, wait, what? You know, it's gonna be all this abstract stuff. We're all gonna get geeky and nerdy. And I was like that, right? Not to that degree, but, you know, to some degree. And so I think it helps introduce modeling in a very friendly, very engaged way. And in that sense, foster that ecoliteracy part that Randy was talking about. Most importantly for me, because the course is heavy on disturbance ecology, those processes that drive the ecosystem activities, I think it fitted well, right? We could study those, we could study succession and the impact of whatever disturbance, and then, you know, visualize what it is by, you know, actively inputting the disturbances. And so those were the objectives, those were the reasons and the objectives for why I wanted to do this. And so we worked on, you know, making sure we're on the same page on those objectives, making sure we're on the same page on logistics. And Randy literally came down here for a whole week to help me implement this in the classroom. And so I decided on a lab where we were to examine ecosystem changes in response to natural and anthropogenic disturbances. I think that was relevant, given that's really what happens in our natural ecosystems. And, you know, like I said, Randy came in and helped with the initial lab. He basically stayed here for a whole week and helped me do it in the classroom. That did the initial teaching of what this is, at least introduce students to it. And then, you know, literally helped us go through that. And as I will tell you, he loves Sasquatch. So we asked the students to model ecosystem change based on, you know, being subjected to Sasquatch. And I was like, what is that? And the students had a kick out of it. But, you know, that's one of the friendly ways that I feel like, you know, a modeling process like this can help students appreciate modeling as a process in general. And of course, that was back in 2016, 2017, I think. And since then, I've been doing this by myself. And in many ways, as I will tell you, lessons learned here, I have had to make adjustments and learn things and call Randy and say, right, we should have done this and this isn't working. So, you know, as part of my advice, if you're thinking about integrating this in your classes, don't be afraid to take over. Don't be afraid to try and do things your way, because I've done that so many times. And for the most part, it's worked with the students and it worked for the course. So yeah, so just a basic introduction to how I got to this. So this slide here sort of just gives you a real quick summary of, you know, what I do in these labs, right? So generally, you know, we have the lab as part of of the many labs we do there, and they know it's coming, and I advertise it up front, and we tell them we're going to do modeling if you haven't done it in any other natural resource course that we offer here, and it's going to be super fun because we're going to be having Sasquatch, and they're like, what? And then, so when the lab comes around, we do a practice run, right? I basically develop a set of step-by-step processes and click and watch type stuff. And we run through from the beginning to the end and produce a result, at each point explaining to the students what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so Randy was kind enough to give me 2 biophysical settings, basically the ecosystems to work with. So this is a northern pine oak, and this is sugar maple basswood system. So this was a nice contrast for me because, you know, one of this is a fire-dependent system, right? So I could do all the fire mess I want, which I love doing. And then this challenges me to do other things, right? How about we think about gap-faced dynamics? The canopy opens up in a small portion, and we have that light penetration, to facilitate regeneration. So this is a nice mix of biophysical settings for this course. So basically the point here is we run through a practice, like from the beginning to the end, right? We model how succession would happen in that system naturally without any external disturbances during this run. And then we model how those successional communities change when you introduce an external disturbance, right? So I do both of those before I get to challenge them, right? So then, the next exciting part is where I tell them, all right, I've been holding your hand through the first part of this. Now I need you to use what you've learned to try and do the same, right? Except now you'll use different transition processes, which is basically the disturbances that you're trying to examine, right? So I say, all right, here we go. You've learned how to run this process. You've learned how to introduce a disturbance. How about now you subject your system to a new disturbance, right? And then the learning part, I want you to examine the graphs that you produce or the products and figure out how did that transition process, how did that disturbance change your several stages, right? So your normal succession, you have the early, the mid, and the late. Of course, we have gradations in each of those categories. How did your disturbance change each of those several communities? And then, the most important part that Randy talked about is conceptualizing, understanding, and explaining for purposes of management. I ask them to use their understanding of this biophysical setting, right, to explain why did the mid-seral community decrease in the landscape. I think that, to me, that's the most important thing, when they can literally think about what they just produced and explain it. And that really is why I do this. They need to have that challenge to be able to think about what they learned in the classroom and use that to explain what they're seeing. And so this next part is just examples of some of the disturbances that I either give them or most of the times I ask them to determine, right? So I mentioned here 3 examples. I could tell them, all right, let's do a mixed severity fire that returns every 50 years, right? And the reason you do that, as was mentioned in the last presentation, is number one, they have to calculate the probability, which, as Randy mentioned, was 1 divided by the return interval. So you gotta give them the return interval, or they gotta determine that, right? And then I also ask them, you need to determine what several community do you want this system to move towards after you implement this disturbance? And I say, all right, let's do an insect invasion. It's anything goes, as Randy said. You can do whatever you wanna do in terms of a disturbance. You can say, all right, climate change is happening and it is driving a lot of what we see around us. So how about we think about climate change driven extreme drought occurring every 5 years, just for pretense, right? And the most exciting part for me is watching them decide their own disturbance, their own severity of that disturbance, their own return interval, and they go crazy with it, right? They say that something came down and mowed the whole lot of trees, and they want to see what that does, right? I mean, is it going to be a savanna for real? You know, so I think for me, the exciting part has been this part explaining what they see, and this part here, seeing what they do when you let them loose, right? How can they be critical enough to implement reasonable disturbances and explain the outcome of that? And I think, you know, in the grand scheme of things, that's all I want to get from these students. They appreciate the process, they actively participate in it, and they're creative about what they're doing, right? Of course, within the ecological context of the system. So these are just two examples I'm going to give here for products that my students, this is just from one of my students back in 2020. And, you know, I will tell you that we start basic. This is, in my view, as basic as it gets. We're just looking to see, all right, you know, before we implemented the disturbance, this was the classification of the different several stages in the landscape or in that ecosystem, the blue, right? This person did a surface fire. And so what happens is now the red is the classification of these several stages after the disturbance, right? So if you look at this graph, this is the basic graph they output, but I think it helps the students learn a lot because, you know, if you look at the early to several and late closed, you know, you can see the contrast here. You might expect that from an ecological understanding of this system. Of course, it's the northern pine oak. But I think the exciting part for me is challenging them to explain this. So these are just two gradations of the mid-several community, right? Mid-1 and mid-2, they're both closed. Why did this go down and why did this go up in the landscape? I think that's the part where I really challenge my students. Can you explain that change to the best of your ability? And I think that also is the strength of this thing for me, the state transition modeling, because it allows me to have them do this, and then I step in and challenge them to explain what they saw. And this is just another example. In this case, we did 2017, we did, I asked the students to do a thinning, selective thinning. I think this one was, Randy was there too. And I also told them, all right, pen sage is a native plant here in Michigan, but it's very competitive, so assume it invades the system. What happens? And, you know, then I challenge them, look, what happened with the mid-3, right? Basically, you have pen sage. Can you help me explain what might have happened there, right? So again, with these two examples, it's the idea of helping students put together the things they learn in the theoretical or in the lecture part of it to making a product and explaining it. And it's been a joy trying to see how that comes together for me. So last slide is just things that I've learned so far. Again, as I said, you know, for good or for bad, these are just my experiences. You know, when we started with Randy, we ran into problems. When he left me alone, I ran into problems. It could be problems with internet connection. It could be problems with, you know, they didn't save something and they have to do it all over again. It could be problems with the graphs. They're doing the same thing, but the output is not the same, which, you know, I was told is got to do with the iterations that the thing goes through. But, you know, things like that, and you take it in stride. So expect some, you know, hiccups along the way. I would say start basic. I'm still in the middle basic part. Every day I try to challenge them and then advance over time, give them more challenging stuff as you go over time. This one is a big one, right? Because I know when I was a student, it happened to me. If you know, if you're an expert in this field and you're trying to integrate it into the classroom and then you start with the jargons, you lose them, right? And so I've been very deliberate about learning from Randy what the jargons are and then figuring out a way to translate that into, all right, this is the jargon and this is what it means, right? I say sometimes feel free to let the students loose. I do that all the time. Just tell them to figure out what to do and show you a product and explain it. And they get a kick out of it. They love it. When you tell them to do some crazy disturbance, they imagine all kinds of things and they're very creative. And finally, before the last one, I continually try to learn to parameterize the models. I don't know much of the details like the presenters here have been talking about, but every day I try to, you know, those attribute tables like we do in in GIS, I try to learn what this column is and why are we doing it that way, and then I translate into the classroom for the students. So I say, if you want to do this, be open to continually learning about parameterizing your models and what they mean. Sometimes you may not use some parameters in your model. And lastly, I feel like being involved with this has really contributed to active learning and retention of information in my classroom. And this is why I continue to do it. I think it's not new per se, but something different. We do a lot of field trips. We see things out there, plant ID, all of that good stuff. But this is one lab they can stay in the lab and still feel like they're doing some active stuff. And so I feel like it's been helpful for me. And I hope if you integrate this in your classroom, it will be helpful for you too. So again, those are my experiences and I appreciate you listening. I'll turn it over back to Randy.
Thanks so much, Priscilla. It's so great to hear your real world examples. And I appreciate that you've done this multiple times in the same sort of lab. That just brings a depth of experience that we really value. So thanks, Priscilla.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, everyone. We ask you a question. Do you need professional support for teaching state and transition modeling in your classrooms or in your office if you're in an agency or with stakeholders? We hope that we have materials for you to use online, for you to dig into this and develop materials on your own. But we think that would be a pretty big leap. And so what we've done is we want to make an offer to you. So next slide, please. Okay, our team, the Nature Conservancy LANDFIRE team, has experience in teaching modeling to, as we mentioned, high school students in college settings. We've worked with a number of stakeholders, and we really enjoy doing that sort of work. And we can bring that experience to your setting, whether it's in a classroom or working with stakeholders or even within a national forest, for example. And everyone needs to get on the same page about how and thinning might interact. We can help facilitate those conversations. Or we can teach you the fish, so to speak. We can teach you how to use the modeling software to do this work yourself. I'll also add that we have 900 ready-to-go ecosystem models that are ready to use, that represent the natural or historical dynamics of those ecosystems. So we're ready to help you kind of launch from those models. We have access to state and transition simulation modeling experts. We don't claim to be the modeling experts. We're facilitators. We can listen. We can implement a lot of things in the models. But if you need to go on to do more sophisticated work, we're happy to facilitate conversations with folks who are true experts in modeling. As noted in the slide, and as Megan just shared in the chat, we have some links for you to check out to learn modeling on your own. Next slide, please. Okay, even though we have those resources, it may not be enough, and or you would just rather work collaboratively, which we would love, all right? So we can help develop materials for you, and we can provide our ideas and our stories. And also, as Priscilla mentioned, we would love to come visit and work with you in person. That was a great week I spent down at Grand Valley State. I learned a lot, and I hope the students did. And when we travel to places, we like to be super accessible. It's not that I come in and run the lab and disappear. I'm there because I want to interact with students. When I go work with stakeholders, there's nothing like going and having a truck ride with people and talking about the models at our computer or out in the field. It's very, very illustrative to do that work. So we're ready to come join you in person or via Zoom if that's what we need to do. We would like to help power your work. We have learning opportunities online, and we can also work with you in person, as I've mentioned. So we would like to come help you, like to come work with you, and so reach out to us. We're ready. Next slide, please. All right, transitioning to the next slide. All right, so I don't want to end and just maybe have thrown out some random ideas for you. I want to try to bring this together and give you a little bit of homework. Megan's going to be sending out links for you to check out. I would love for you to go have a beverage of your choice, brainstorm how you might use modeling in your environment in multiple ways, not just for the results, but also for storytelling, for communicating, for teaching. Consider using the models in your classroom or professional setting, then reach out to us. You don't have to do this all by yourself. I think you could, but you don't have to, so reach out to us. That's what we're paid to do, and that's what we would love to do, is to come help you. And so with that, we'd like to take questions and have discussion. As I mentioned, my internet and audio is up and down, so I'm going to turn on the chat. I'm going to watch that. You've got Priscilla, you've got myself, and then other members from the LANDFIRE team are here as well to field your questions and hopefully have a lively discussion. So thanks so much, everyone, for your participation. And with that, we'll open it up.
Thanks, Randy. Yeah, that was a good talk, and we have 15 minutes, so we are ready to answer questions, and please don't be shy. I made this a meeting instead of a webinar, so people have the option to turn on their cameras and introduce themselves and throw out ideas. So please don't be shy.
Megan, I have a question. So,
yes.
Randy and Priscilla, how do you think what you presented would be different if it's not a classroom situation? If it's a situation where you're going to an office of some organization and you're trying to work, would it be different, do you think? Or really, is it kind of the same thing where you're trying to work with people and get them started in modeling to accomplish the same goals?
Randy, you want to go first?
Okay. Great question, Jim. And we'd like to highlight that. Our team has been to national forests, for example, and worked in sort of a workshop setting where people will call out, for lack of a better phrase, disturbance ideas for us to put in a model and test. And we'll do that on the fly. So maybe someone from one side of the national forest will think that fire regimes work this way, and maybe someone will think it works another way. And we can test that right away. And so it's very similar, I would say, to the lab, except for typically in professional settings, we're driving the model, though it doesn't have to be that way. That's just the way it seems like it's worked out in my experience so far. So I think that the goals and sort of the experience are similar. It's just that who drives the actual computer can be different. And Priscilla, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I know you've done work across, across classrooms and then in other settings as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, two things. I feel like in the classroom, we're sort of having this confined set of parameters that we want to subject the system to some degree. In a professional setting, say, let's pretend with the Nature Conservancy professionals, they're going to have specific issues that are addressing on the ground in the field. And as Randy said, I think they're going to really be directly informing what you input into your into the model. And I've seen that work out in other settings as well. So it's in that way, I feel like it's a little different where, we could have these things that we set from our mind that the system will be subjected to the biophysical setting. But in such professional settings, you get a lot of feedback on what they need addressed, right? And what might best address that. I also think the interaction might be different. I think there could be a lot of back and forth, people, giving you ideas and interacting with the person helping run the exercise, which is not to say in the classroom it doesn't happen, but in the classroom, it tends to be, okay, I go in and I do the spiel of what this is about and what I want them to do. And then they get to work and start going crazy with the disturbances, right? But I think in a professional setting, there will be a lot of back and forth like we're doing now. What if this happened? What if the Pennsylvania sedge increases to this level? What do you do to that degree? Would you change the severity of the fire? So I think the interaction, and as Randy mentioned, the inputs into the model might be different between those two settings, if I got your question correctly.
Randy here again. I'll add another quick thing that we didn't talk about so much today, which would be capstone or graduate students, for example. Right now, we're working with a student at the Evergreen College in Washington State, and she is a student, a senior there, and she has implement different management scenarios for the Wayne National Forest. So it's sort of, it's been great to see her really dig into the ecology of the Oak Hickory ecosystems there and to interact with agency people. So that really blows this model, I mean, up into an amazing learning experience for this student. I don't know about you all, but I sadly went through my graduate student experience I didn't meet with anyone in my lab or my university. I never met with agency people. And so this is just another tool to connect students to agency people. So that's been an amazing experience to watch this student, Avery Merritt, interact with professionals. So that kind of connects the two, Jim. That's not exactly what you asked, but it made me think of that.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks, Priscilla. I'm going to put the poll up on the screen, so please feel free to take the quick poll. Who's next? Who has a question? Surely there's others out there. I'm curious if anybody has visited the vegetation modeling website that we made. If you have, I'd love it if you'd raise your hand, because we spent a long time building that website, and it was, we're improving it every, sort of iteration. Any other questions out there?
Priscilla, thanks so much, and Randy as well. Priscilla, I am wondering if you have thought about using this type of lab or learning experience outside of this particular ecology class. Do you have other classes that you considered it for, or do you even think it might have application outside of ecology?
Oh, yeah, I think great question. I think it has an application for most of our natural resource courses. So I come from the natural resource management program, which is housed within the biology department. And nearly all of us, the faculty in this program, teach courses where this could be something that could be used. And, I've here and there talked to my colleagues about, thinking about it, considering for those courses. But for myself, like I said, I started it in this course just because there's so many ways I could go with it, given the different components of the course, right? But recently, as I mentioned, I teach a fire ecology course, which is both undergraduate and a graduate component to it. And over the last 2 years, I've had it, the state transition modeling work being done as a semester-long project for the graduate students in that course. And that's gone great because for them, if they didn't ever take the 460, the Terrestrial Ecosystem Ecology with me, I just give them a quick run through what we're doing and the steps, and then I set them free. Like, you have a semester to come up with 3 or 4 disturbances, subject whatever system to it, and let me know what you find. And of course, the ecological explanations have to be at a different level from the undergraduates, right? And it's gone great. They've loved it, especially this last semester. The students were really excited about that. One of them told me, this is something, every time I come from the field and I'm tired and I just want to mess with something, I just sit down and do it. Not to say that it's the smallest thing they could do, but it's something they enjoy doing. even on their downtime. And so to your question, yes, I am implementing it in my fire ecology course as well. I think I will try to keep it to those two for now. I teach a capstone, which I don't think it would fit well. A capstone is our senior thesis class, and I also teach an intro to natural resources. I teach environmental science, but I think it fits better for the terrestrial ecology and the fire ecology. I think one of the things that I would like to mention too is I am going to be asking Randy to give me other biophysical settings because I would like the students to go crazy with the disturbances. And so, you know, I think it feeds into your question, why else can you do it? And I think the more settings we can give the students, the better they can be creative about what they do with the systems.
Thanks for that, Corey. Megan was probably going to call this out, but I wanted to mention a question from Sigrid. How long did you devote to this work, a single lab, a week, or a week of classes? You mentioned the graduate student work, but how long do you usually spend on this with your undergraduates?
Oh, excellent question. Thanks, Sigrid, for the question. You know, the initial one was tough. When you came down and we did it, it was the first time I was also working through this. So you can imagine I was learning as we were teaching the students. But since then, the more I've understood about trace state and transition modeling and SynchroSim as the software to run it, the easier it has gotten for me. And so I have a 2-hour, 50-minute lab. We do it all in that lab. And over the years, I've figured out that maybe in the first lab this week, let's say, I teach them what it is. We do a quick run through, I set them loose, and then next week's lab, they just come in and go to get into it by themselves, right? And just run it by themselves. So I'm making those adjustments as we go, where it is no longer going to be a 1-week lab. Like this week we're doing this and that's it. We're gonna do it this week and then next week you're gonna do it. You come to the lab and you run it by yourself, right? So I would say a 3-hour lab is just good enough. It's good. It would fit in there for sure. And like I mentioned, you can have the graduate students do it as a semester-long project. Of course, you have to make it more challenging so they got things to do. But for just the undergraduates and in a lab setting, a 3-hour window works just fine.
Thanks, Priscilla.
Quickly mention that with the high school group I've worked with the landscape conservation forecasting, that's been a 2-hour sort of thing, one 2-hour session. They're not parameterizing the model so much. It's a lot simpler. They're entering in numbers of acres of different treatments, but 2 hours suffices for that. Yeah, so great question, Sigrid.